Hey, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas. It's Saturday morning, my friend, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Well, good morning, everyone. This is Dan in Gainesville, Florida, and today we have acclaimed director and designer, Thaddeus Strassberger.
And this is David, coming to you from the beautiful Belmont Shore neighborhood of Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers.
4 brothers today.
That's right. We're 4 brothers. This is great. We've got a very special guest today, Thaddeus Strassberger, who I have known for, how long has it been, Thad? Since La Scala, right? Weren't you involved in that La Scala show?
It would have been the Fenice, actually. So
the Fenice.
15 years ago.
Wow. Yeah. And he was just a young tyke back then. And now he's a famous designer director. And I'm an old tyke, and I haven't changed at all. But anyway, this is episode 198. Thad is here, and let's have Stan tell us a little bit about Thad.
Yeah, okay. I haven't seen Thaddeus since I was in Oklahoma, I'm just making that up. But I'm going to do my best to read this bio so you'll get a little bit to know about him. So Thaddeus Strassberger was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And at the age of 10, he started working for the local repertory theater company and quickly got hooked on everything backstage. At age 14, he went off to an opera summer camp as a technical theater intern and was hooked on opera. The summer after he finished high school, he was an apprentice at the Santa Fe Opera, after which he moved to New York City to start studying engineering and art history at the Cooper Union for the advancement of science and art. And I must say, you can't apply to Cooper Union. They only let certain people in. And after graduating, he was awarded a Fulbright Fellowship to attend the Accademia Teatro alla Scala in Milan. His big break came when he won the European Opera Prize, which gave him his debut as a director and designer with a co-production in Germany and Ireland. Since then, he has continued to direct and design operas around the world, including productions for the LA Opera, the Washington National Opera, Bard Summerscape in upstate New York, London's Royal Opera House, Covent Garden, the Bolshoi, and the Ekaterinburg State Opera in Russia, as well as across Europe and the iconic NCPA in Beijing. Future productions include a new Turandot in a vast open-air quarry near Vienna that seats over 5,000 people, as well as returns to Russia, Germany, and in 2022 to his hometown of Tulsa to make his first ever production there.
So Thad, that's why I was confused about La Scala, because I saw that you were an intern at La Scala. Very interesting.
Well, I actually started there in the academia as a scenic design intern or apprentice or...
Right, whatever they call it. We talked about that last week.
Everything is sort of a different nomenclature there. But it turned out to be a really good thing because I was in the design department at the beginning, and I started working with some other designers that weren't speaking Italian, and I speak Italian very well, and I was able to then get hired on as an interpreter / assistant for Paul Brown on a production of Giselle, which then I later went on tour with to New York and LA with that. And so it sort of gave me my first contract with La Scala right out of it. So actually the sort of intern into apprentice into a full paying contract ended up being a really good thing.
I'd say. Like a meteor, man. Good work. So listen, Steve has our first question for you today.
Well, let's just jump right in there. I mean, you are in rarefied air. What is it like to be a director and a designer?
Well, I started out wanting to be a designer, I think, because as a kid, I didn't really know what a director did. It's much more sort of intellectual and literary, and it's not so obvious, I think, to the casual viewer. Even when you talk to normal people about TV shows and films and things, if you start talking about directors, they don't really know what you're talking about. But the design is something very tangible, and that's something that I started working with. And as I was working on being a designer and being more in rehearsals and really small things, sort of off and fringe and, various situations, I realized that what I was interested in doing was arranging the space in which dramatic events happen. And I wanted to have more and more control over what the people do. And so working very closely with the directors that I was working with, and then realizing that basically what I was doing was directing by proxy, and I might as well just try to direct Anyway, so I came to it the other way around. There's some directors that direct and then begin designing, but for me, it really started as a visual world that then moved over into the more dramaturgical one.
Now, I know that you say that you are mostly a set designer, but I understand that you also do lighting, costumes, and video.
Yes, it just sort of depends on the situation. I mean, I work in so many different places around the world, which until recently with the pandemic has been a real advantage because I'm not sort of beholden to any one system. Right now, it's not very good because I can't get to any of the places that I have relationships to work with. But every theater and every sort of country has different ways of accomplishing exactly the same thing. When you're dealing with opera, there's very limited titles actually that we actually end up producing. They obviously do new work and contemporary things and really rare pieces, but overall we're doing the same thing. There's some words and notes on a page and we've got to get it up. But it happens so differently in so many different places that because I'm interested in the overall design of it, and I really don't see the boundaries between where light and sets and video and costumes and directing are all the time, depending on the production. To me, it's very fluid to move between them for different projects.
One last thing before Stan jumps in here. I don't think we mentioned you're in London right now. What's the theater scene, opera scene like in London during the lockdown?
Well, there's nothing. I mean, around March 12th, everything shut down, and including West End and Broadway style shows and all opera, and nothing has really happened. There's been a few sort of outdoor socially distanced kinds of things that they've tried to do, but for the most part, there was a ballet that happened. And I think it was actually a bit of a tricky thing that people thought things were happening, sort of the general public. But, there are revivals of things. There's no new designers, no new directors, no real rehearsals happening. They're just sort of getting a product out there. But that was really short-lived, like a few performances. And we're coming on, 10 months of that.
Wow. Yeah, it's very familiar.
So, it's really interesting to hear you talk about starting out as a designer and then realizing that you maybe should be directing too. So this question is sort of about that. So tell us how the design process is incorporated into staging rehearsals and how you work with the singers and actors to inform them about the larger design, both aesthetically and in technical terms as well. How does that happen?
Well, I mean, since I'm the one who's making the model and making all the designs and everything, I'm thinking about every sort of millimeter of the set, where people will sit, where they stand, where the relationships are, where the barriers are, how it's meant to work in sort of a larger kind of metaphorical way. Even if it's not that important in the end, it sort of all makes sense to me. So I don't have to take notes or write anything down because, like, when I look at the model, it literally has the sort of the roadmap, sort of GPS laid out to me in a way how the whole thing is going to unfold, with some sort of special areas that I sort of keep open until I get to the rehearsal process to figure out. I like to leave myself quite a bit of flexibility there as well. But when I'm working with the singers, especially, I really like to tell them why they're doing something sort of for the composition or for the sort of genre. Like, for example, I did a show in Austria 2 years ago, Verdi's Un ballo in maschera, and it was set in a kind of 1960s neo-noir sort of world. So, of course, I had to show them lots of 1960s film noir. So I can't assume that singers that are from all over the world have had the same sort of cinematic visual background. I've got singers from Georgia and singers from Russia and singers from Portugal. In that case, I had a Bosnian singer and I had 2 German singers and Austrians. So we sort of get aesthetically on the same page. And then when I'm working, when I say, listen, lean against that wall, put your right foot up and smoke a cigarette, it's not sort of some random thing that I've invented, but it's like, well, let's look at like all of these iconic pictures of people in hats and trench coats leaning against walls smoking cigarettes and figure out why that's important. And then I'm also going to tell you, when we get on stage, where that scene is being lit from. It's like, okay, no matter what happens, you need to know from that right torm that there's like this big 3K HMI that's coming on, and that's making that effect. So what you're doing when you're looking sort of out of your peripheral vision, just check your shadow. Make sure that your trench coat isn't sort of opened in a weird flap that doesn't make that beautiful silhouette against the wall. But I'm not just telling them arbitrarily what to do, but I'm sort of including them in the whole process. So obviously in live theater, when anything can happen and, the light's in a different way, or the revolve sort of hits a different spot, or the conductor's doing something slightly different than they imagined, they can still achieve the big goal of what I want and not just sort of a series of instructions. And that goes through a lot of what I do, that they know that what I'm doing has a reason, and so the reason they need to do it is to keep the aesthetic as tight as possible.
Make me think of Edward Gordon Craig and that whole era of, the one you're like that one mind. You are seeing it, you're hearing it, you're feeling it, you're lighting it. It's really, I've never seen any of your productions, but now I'm really excited to want to.
Well, with the design, I think is really important is I spend a lot of time with the props department to make sure that everything that the singers touch and look at that's in their immediate sort of cone of vision is as realistic as possible. They've got so much going on with remembering text and music and lots of input and all these things that could go wrong and moving scenery that I just want them to look down at the table. And I work with singers all the time and they say they've never had that in their entire career. Really famous singers for 30 years. And I literally, like when I'm doing the letter, when Violetta reads it, I'll lay it out in Photoshop for a couple hours, really thinking about how he wrote it, and I'll put, like where the pen stopped and the ink bled, and where it pulled away. So when they look at it, they know, and how it scans, and how they read it, the line breaks and everything. It's not just sort of ye old font on parchment paper. And if they're supposed to be handed a passport, then it has a picture of the right person in the passport, and it has the right dates, and it's laminated in a way so that they're not having to imagine that this folded over piece of stapled paper is a passport, but it's actually a real object. And I think that that's really important, that design isn't only what the audience can see from the middle of the auditorium, but it's also what they can see, and then how the design projects out their belief in the honesty of the situation.
That's so beautiful the way you said that. Wow.
It's not a prop. It's part of the story. I know, Thad, you listen to our show every now and then, and you probably have heard us talk about in rehearsals as lighting designers, a lot of times we have to remind directors of where the light is coming from while they're staging the show in a rehearsal room. You don't have to do that because you already know. And you explain that to the actor or singer, and that's really, really important, and makes it a much more complete show, and obviously a much easier transition onto stage.
It saves a lot of time in the end.
So you just really are doing something quite complex, and you started this discussion by saying that your cast is wildly international. So how difficult is that in communication? Because I'm sure you don't share one common language.
You work it out really soon in rehearsals. I mean, I speak Italian and German and Spanish and English well enough to rehearse whole productions in. So with that, it's generally enough to easily get by. There's sort of food groups of languages that sort of work themselves out. And I've never, ever had a problem figuring out who speaks what. As a matter of fact, I recently worked with a singer from Mongolia in Spain, and he understood Italian absolutely perfectly, and he didn't respond a lot vocally, but in the staging rehearsals, he would respond physically to what I wanted, and he would just say, okay, I'll show you everything that we did. And so that was actually really great, because it just saves a lot of talking as well. I just explain quickly what I want, and then he's like, do you want it like this or do you want it like this? And I'm like, that's amazing.
Was the passion for language there as a child, as a young adult?
It was, actually. I studied Spanish in high school, and then I just started learning Italian on my own shortly after high school, just as a sort of general interest. And it's just sort of the key to communication. I mean, I wouldn't even say that I have a huge passion in all of those languages, but I love being in a rehearsal room where you just can communicate with all these people from around the world. I was in a really interesting situation last year when I was working in Beijing, and the main language in that theater is Italian, because so many of the singers study in Italy at the conservatory. And so all of my assistants and the woman, the sort of the technical director that was responsible for realizing the scenery, and getting all the shop drawings and everything done, we did everything in Italian. And sometimes I would just think this is totally surreal that I'm on the outskirts of Beijing in a workshop, speaking Italian with these Chinese people, but yet we're building $1 million worth of scenery and it's looking exactly like I want. So don't question it.
That theater is pretty amazing, didn't you think so?
Oh, it's out of this world.
Isn't that out of this world? I don't know if you guys know what we're talking about, but it was a theater that I believe was built for the Olympics.
It's only 10 years old, yeah.
Yeah, and it looks like a giant spaceship has landed in the middle of a lake. And to get into it, you actually have to, you're about, I don't know, maybe 300 meters away from the actual building, and you go down into a tunnel, and then you walk underneath the lake, and the lake, it has a glass ceiling above you, so you're actually walking underwater. And then there's so much marble in this theater. And actually, that building holds, I believe, 3 theaters. One opera house and maybe 1 or 2 other theaters. It's truly an amazing space, beautiful space.
Even more so, what's amazing about it, so it has huge revolves and all the stage podiums that can do everything, but they built another theater on the outskirts of town that absolutely mimics it with the idea that you can pre-tech your show in a sort of out-of-town space that it's exactly the same as moving into the theater.
Yeah, pretty awesome theater. It really is. Let's talk a little bit about opera. Both Thad and I are kind of opera geeks, and we know a lot about it, but a lot of our listeners don't, and we have a lot of young listeners. So I think it's really important that they just learn a little bit about how you approach opera, like the difference between Stagione and Repertory demands, and how it affects how and what gets designed.
Well, you've brought up a good point. First of all, opera, the definition of that is so sort of unclear. For me, it just means that we're using words and music and visual elements to tell a story. And I think that in a way just demystifies it, because I think that's all of what theater is trying to do, going back to the ancient Greek theaters. We're just telling stories with all of the tricks. And what drew me to opera, I think, in the beginning was that there's just a lot of tricks. They're usually in bigger buildings. They're better funded. There's everything is bigger and sort of shinier, if you will. So you get more stuff to play with. But in the end, it's just storytelling in the purest form. And I think that I try to strip away a lot of the sort of the trappings that come around with opera. You asked about sort of the difference between the repertory system and Stagione, and that's something that exists, I think, more in regional theaters, actually, than does in opera, in America at least, but I'll explain. Stagione means that you do one show at a time. So a theater like La Scala opens up, and there's one show that then plays 10 or 15 performances, and then it closes, and then you put the next one up, sort of one after the other. A real repertory theater in the sort of the German-Austrian model is where they have an ensemble of singers and a full-time crew and a full-time building that has a number of operas, ballets, symphonies, and plays that they will do over the course of a season. So you may start rehearsing something, it opens the beginning of the season. It might have 15 performances, but they could be spread out over 1 or 2 years. And so the sets actually have to come up and down 2 and 3 times a day. You may be doing a tech rehearsal or a lighting session in the morning for one show, and at lunchtime they roll over to a scene in another show to continue with a staging rehearsal with a cast. And then at dinner break, they could roll over and do a show that evening, after which they strike so that they are ready for the 10 o'clock call the next morning of a fourth piece. So it's constantly moving, as opposed to like just installing it once and having it all there. And I think that presents a lot of challenges and opportunities in knowing which of the two systems that you're working in.
Absolutely. That's how the Met and also the Royal Opera House work, pretty much.
Yes.
Where they're in repertory mostly. And a lot of even smaller companies like Central City is in repertory.
In Russia, what happens is actually they can keep a production in the repertory for years. Like I did a Satyagraha that started in 2014, and it's now played over 60 performances, because they just sort of keep rescheduling it. As long as they sell over 85% of the house, then they put it in the next 3 months of rotation.
I think my Tosca's still running. The
I
one
think
that
it
Paul
is,
and
yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a long time. I think that was 2007. My God.
But as a designer, as a lighting designer especially, one thing that I noticed when I started working in Europe that the repertory system offers you a huge advantage of is that you don't have to make all of your decisions at the beginning and then you have to live with them due to the schedule. So they have to change the cyclite color gel every day for each different lighting session and each different production. So if you decided that you wanted a whole system of 201 today, and then you sort of realized that it was a bit too cold or it was a bit too dim, or you want to change your mind, and then tomorrow you say, well, just when you rep it out, pull it out and put something new in. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. Whereas if you were doing that at a big opera house that was Stagione, then you'd have to like pay for a call or you're giving up lighting time, if you have to do more work notes or something. Or you could say, listen, hang that HMI, 8 feet further up stage tomorrow because we're going to make a really good angle that we didn't know we were going to have. Whereas if you have a big set and a rake on stage, maybe it's impossible to get that HMI down because you can't get the genie on the floor or whatever, or it would take 8 hours to disassemble the set or something. But when it's all designed in, I think that it gives a lot of flexibility.
Man, I'm just listening to you and I'm wishing I had a director like you to work with. My God, how many people in the world are out there like you who understand the whole thing? I mean, some oftentimes the biggest frustration is like, the directors who don't have a clue about what we do. And I love just listening to you. It's fantastic.
Well, some lighting designers appreciate it, and some of them are just sort of like, when I'm just like, just put it in palette 14 and rotate, just rotate the assembly. It'll work.
Easier if you understand it. I mean, it's just great.
Well, Jampolis did this. Jampolis directed and
yes,
designed.
There's an example.
And so
That's
does
right.
Paul and Ken. Right, but there are very few people.
That's what I'm saying. But I wish everyone was like you in terms of directors. Yeah.
Plus, I have worked with Thad, and he is one of the most open directors I've ever seen. So he's not your typical person who you'd think be like very, okay, I know it better than you.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that every director or choreographer I've worked with is ignorant of the design and technical aspects of the business. I'm not saying that at all. But when you have somebody who has that kind of depth that you have, that has to result in a better product on stage. Just how could it not?
Well, for me, what I like to do when we first get it, obviously we've talked all about the design and everything beforehand, and the lighting designer, he or she's been in rehearsal, and we've talked about cueing and flow and aesthetic and all that. But when the first day we get on stage and they're comfortable that the rig is kind of run out and working and everything, then I'll just sort of say, like, show me what you got. I'm like, okay, because, you're in a new country. There's always new equipment, new brands, new nomenclature, new boards. We're dealing with Grandma 3 a lot of times, but then there's, and so you kind of know the sequence, even sort of like how I can best talk to them that's going to get the result that I want. And, sometimes you're in Russia with like really old boards and things, and you're like, okay, like, so I'll just like do something else while you're like dealing with, key sequences and, building effects and things. But like, I'll just say, listen, like, show me that front wash system, show me what it is so I can see the color temperature of what open white looks like. And then I can say like, okay, like roll some cyan. Okay, I can see what these do. Show me your edges. Okay, oh, it does a frost. You can actually change the focus. Oh, those are fixed. And then it's like, so you just sort of get a quick idea of the vocabulary of what's going to be possible, so that then if I can say, oh, do that thing, or save that as a look, Yeah. And then it's a shorthand, and then they can sort of like keep working and being creative around it after we've done like the sort of these big sort of milestones. Well, meanwhile, I'm running back to deal with the, the set and the singers and the conductor and all of that stuff. But I know what is possible. And also sometimes I can say, listen, just show me what's the easy solution to what we're trying to do as well. And then, because sometimes like the 2 second, I can push a button and make that happen, I can quickly compromise as also the set designer, because I can say, listen, oh, I see that light that I absolutely love. It is whacking that border like crazy. But I was just talking to the stage carp guy, and like, if I swap those two pieces, and I know how the set works, then you know what? Don't even take that as a lighting note. I will deal with that in the morning.
Oh, man.
And then you just save time.
That's how you do it.
I just really want directors to hear this interview. This is just wonderful to hear you speak this way. Boy,
but you also have to have a very capable mind to do this.
Well, he got it to Krupa Union, so that's just
Well, think about it, because when you're in a tech rehearsal and 90% of your focus is making sure the singers know where to go and where to stage them and then solving problems and staging. How much time do you really have to say, maybe this angle's not working. Maybe we need to, you know what I mean? So in order to do what Thad does, and very few other people can do, they really have to have a fast mind. It may seem easy for Thad, but I think it's really an amazing
to your
thing.
point, David, we are creating a class. It's going to be called like Entertainment Design, How It's Made. And I've been thinking about resources for that. Is there any videotape of you doing this magic that you do?
Not yet.
Let's get a documentary going, damn it.
Just planting a seed. Just planting a seed. Okay. But to be able to sort of see you doing that, I think is a model for both designers and directors to say, you don't have to. I get a lot of rhetoric. I don't want to understand how you do that. Just do it. I'm like, really? You're a director. You don't want to understand how we do it. Like, how can you not want to understand?
You can't. I don't think you can learn how to do this, Stan.
I don't know if you can. I don't know if you can learn how to do it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying we ought to all have access to seeing someone do it.
Well, I'll give you another secret sauce tip. So in these repertory theaters, because there's many performances and people get sick and there's lots of different casts, I often have 2 or 3 casts. In Russia, I even have 4 casts sometimes. And when we're doing sort of late tech rehearsals, sort of late in the process, but like way before dress rehearsals or something, because also in Europe and Russia, we get a lot more time on stage. So it's not so pressed for every minute. But I will sit actually, because if the singer's up on stage for the first time and she's like doing her big scene in the aria and dealing with the conductor and the pianist and all those issues and the tenor or whatever, so I actually don't bother the person that's actually on stage at the moment. I'll sit with their counterparts, the other 2 women that would be singing the role, and I'll say, listen, do you see when she turns and looks at the window? And then they go, oh, wow, that's really beautiful. If I stepped into that when, I go for the high C or whatever, that would be really great. So, and it actually helps them to see what the result is.
Absolutely.
And then I'll say, oh, do you see when she just steps down for a second to stop to talk to the conductor? Whoa, she's totally out of the light. So that's your lane. You've got like 4 feet wide that you look brilliant. You start drifting downstage, you think you're more present, but you go, oh, I just disappear. And I'm like, yes, because the reason is the side light's coming from there. Those lights that hurt your eyes when you have to make that quick exit, that's what's doing that work. And then they're like, oh, okay.
I've had situations where I've done that with actors where directors gave me the freedom to sort of help them stage it, and it always turned out beautifully. But oftentimes there's, in some of my scenarios, there's a little bit of friction there, but you are both of those things, which is great.
Good directors do this, though. I mean, they understand light. That's the thing.
Is there ever a time, Thad, where you work as just a designer and you're not the director? Just out of curiosity.
Actually, it's interesting you say that. I can't talk about it, but for the very first time, I'm talking about working with a director when I'm just the designer, just the set designer.
Very interesting.
It's a commercial project, so it's something different. It's sort of moving outside the opera realm.
Would you like to get into film and other types of media?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that there's a real sort of inertia that happens with the genre jumping. And that's one thing I've been thinking about during the pandemic, is because opera plans so far in advance, 2, 3, 4 years, it's very difficult to take those last minute sort of opportunities. And most, like even Broadway bound type things, happen very fast. Films start shooting tomorrow when they get the funding and they get the star in place. And it's difficult to have that sort of freedom of the your time to do it, that you're not already committed to something else. But yes, yeah, that'd be great. I could see you doing that. I really can, because you're that expansive. I really do. And I hope you get the opportunity. I really do.
Let's keep this thing going here. Can you talk a little bit about the differences in practices? I mean, you've brought up Russia, America, Germany, China. What are the aesthetic and practical differences there? I think time is one of the biggest factors, which I alluded to before, how much time you have on stage. For example, in Russia, this theater where I've done 3 shows in Ekaterinburg, and I'm going back to do a 4th one just as soon as COVID opens up, it's a repertory theater that plays, I think, 8 performances a week on their main stage when they're in their full season. I think there's 2 matinees during the week, and there's only 1 dark day, so that works out to 8. And
but when you're the opening show of the season, you are on the stage, the Opera House stage, from the very first day. You're never in a rehearsal room. And they've been building the scenery just at the end of the previous season. So you actually have 6 weeks on stage with most of the original scenery. And to me, that's a huge luxury. It's almost like how you see in old movies about how they did Broadway shows with, Betty
Busby
Davis.
Berkeley.
Yeah.
Let's do a show.
Let's do a show. It's all there. The gang's all here. And that's a really great thing, because then you can literally work on one 5-minute tech transition for an 8-hour day, or you can stage a whole scene with the chorus and the dancers and everything in real space. You're not taping anything out. So for when I'm dealing with these shows that oftentimes have a cast of over 100 people, I'm not relying on everybody to sort of have an understanding of what exactly we're doing abstractly in one space. And it's also, I can be very physical with it because I don't speak Russian. That's not one of the languages I speak. So I have an interpreter who's amazing who does it, but I'm also very physical and I can just be in the real place. In America, just you have such little time that you have to really have such a plan for what you want to do. And you have to even plan in for when you want to be spontaneous, those 5 minutes when that's sort of allowed. But in Germany is another thing because of how much work they do. They have so many Traviatas in a season in any one area that you could drive or take a train within an hour or two. So you're actually really pushed to not do anything that resembles traditional, but to do something completely sort of off the wall and wacky. And sometimes it's a bit exhausting to just sort of have to come up with something new for new's sake when you're working in that environment. But then other times when you really embrace it, you have such an amazing freedom that you can just sort of start with a blank canvas and start from scratch. As far as lighting specifically goes, that has big implications. In Russia, for example, you were asking me before about when I designed lights. I started designing lights there because I was on stage for 6 weeks. And they have a repertory house plot that really can't change because they do these 8 shows a week. And so there's a lot of moving lights and a lot of sort of old Soviet equipment. It's a sort of a real mix of crazy stuff. But I literally thought, well, each morning I could light the show. I could light a scene for 2 hours. From like 8 to 10, then work with the cast until lunchtime. And then in the afternoon, I could say, you know what, this was really great. The board op and all the electricians saw what I was doing with the cast. And then we just continue. And then they would say, we could hang this sodium vapor light, or like, we have this crappy, thing that the shutter doesn't work. The shutter doesn't work on it, but like I saw what you're doing.
Tank.
You just like turn it on and you could wheel that piece of scenery in for it and that will like douse it. And I'll be like, well, that's a great idea. Like, let's do that. So it's much more the sort of the old school. Like I'm not dealing with hookup charts and circuits and all of that. I just literally, the way I do it is with a laser pointer, and we take all the masking out, and I just literally say that unit there pointed here. And then I say bigger, smaller, palette changes and all of that. But it's that sort of basic. And in a way, it's great. It's just a less talking. It's just like me and a couple guys out at the desk pointing with a laser pointer and nodding a lot. And it's really efficient.
My favorite tool, laser pointers. I love them.
That's how Schneider Simpson used to light.
That's how
he
I
used to just go in there and say,
Yeah.
take that light, put it over here. Now Stan has a question that's really important. Not that the other ones weren't, but I think it really hits us right now of what the world is going through and what our profession is going through. So Stan, I set you up, buddy.
So, Thad, I understand that you're super passionate about freelance healthcare access and those kinds of issues, and that you just happen to be a member of the Cherokee Nation and a resident of the UK. And both of those offer healthcare that's independent of employment. So how does this affect our relationship with unions, employers, and families? Maybe you want to talk to us about that a little bit.
I think it affects everything, because if you're not healthy, you can't do anything else.
Right.
Amen.
And that is just a fundamental human right to be healthy. And I think that we are living in one of the richest, most affluent, most healthy possible times in the history of the world, that it's absolutely immoral and a crime that everybody doesn't have access to being healthy and basically comfortable. And there's many different ways that we can go about doing that. There's lots of different systems and sort of ideologies that go around it. But I think the way that it affects our work in the theater is really crucial to sort of understanding the differences in how we work. I'll give a few examples. So, for example, in the UK, that your access to healthcare is not in any way tied to your employer, employment, level of employment, or financial situation. It's included in what the nation pays as taxes. So even you, if you're a visitor here, you can visit the hospital. You can't come here expressly to use the healthcare system, but should you need it while you're here, it is open, because the idea is that when everybody is healthy, then everybody is healthy. So the people that cook for you or clean for you or take care of your children also need to be healthy so that you can be healthy. And it's not really just sort of like, oh, well, we look after them because it's a nice thing to do. It's just about how the whole system can work together. And I think that it goes a lot toward during this whole 2020, there's been a lot of talk about diversity and inclusion in our field. And I think that there's a lot of privilege that goes underlying with healthcare issues. For example, if you come from a family that has parents with stable employment and a certain level of income, then there's a good chance that as a high school student that you are also covered on their plan. As a college student, you're most likely covered on their plan. And even there can be COBRA sort of extension kinds of things that can bridge you over as you're starting out your freelance career. So if you want to be a lighting designer and you want to take an internship or an apprenticeship, and you have an underlying health condition, or something happens that you fall and break your wrist or something, and you need health care, and that's covered, then that's just not a worry. So that's already just a fraction of society that sort of has that ability to do that without worrying about it. If you have an underlying health condition and you don't have that family situation, the privilege, as I would call it, then you might end up not being able to take a lower underpaid internship opportunity that allows somebody else to get further ahead because you simply can't afford to not live in order to do that. And when we get into the pandemic situation, when it's even worse, when your employment and your healthcare are linked, and there's a deadly disease that's running rampant in society, and you lose your job, and then you lose your healthcare, that seems like a recipe for disaster. I think part of the anxiety that I've been seeing amongst my colleagues all over the world has been magnified many times by my American friends and colleagues that also have to deal with the fact that their breast cancer or their diabetes or their whatever is the care for that and the treatment for that is called into question when they've lost their job, in addition to paying their rent or their mortgage or their food. There's models for it. And one thing I mentioned being a Cherokee citizen is a lot of people don't know this, that the Indian healthcare services in America are actually very similar to the United Kingdom's healthcare system. When you're a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, as I and all of my blood relatives are, then you have access to the Cherokee Nation healthcare system, and you sign up, you just let them know that you're enrolled in the system, and then you go and you see a doctor, and you have a baby, and you get your prescriptions, and you have an operation, and it's all covered. And it works really well, and the measurable outcomes of it are superior to people that pay a lot more for private healthcare insurance in America. And I think a lot of people don't know that there's this sort of mini model of a nationalized healthcare system that's already operating parallel in America that could drastically help our industry. Because I'm a member of USA 829, I'm a member of AGMA. Neither of those unions or organizations provide me in my situation with any sort of healthcare coverage. As a matter of fact, the USA 829 is an interesting case because my contracts, the companies are required to contribute to the pension and welfare benefits, but you are required, in order to access any of the medical money that was deposited in your name, to have an employer-sponsored insurance scheme before you can access any of the money for incidental expenses or something. So because I don't have American health insurance, all of that money, thousands of dollars, just gets evaporated because it goes to a basic plan for 1 quarter in which I'm not even in the United States.
Wow. That, just out of curiosity, I don't know that much about the Cherokee Nation's healthcare, but is it similar to TRICARE? Oftentimes we hear that TRICARE is something that we should just make for everybody. right? Which everybody says is if you're a veteran, or you were a government employee, TRICARE is supposedly quite good, and it's also nationalized.
I don't know exactly the models and how they work. I just know that this sort of merit-based system, and by merit I mean dollar-based system, is ridiculous. When European people hear that people once a year have to sit down and read a big book of a plan to pre-imagine what kind of cancer or what kind of freak accident they're going to have in the coming 12 months, either them, their spouse, or their children, and then make rational financial projections based on this telephone book of fine print, they go, what on earth are you talking about?
When you're talking about the irrationality, today, in fact, there was some news on this. Warren Buffett and two other huge companies, Berkshire Hathaway and two others, I can't remember, I think it was Verizon and another one, got together 3 years ago. They formed this company called Haven that was going to look at all the factors to totally reform American healthcare. And today it was announced that they're shutting it down because they couldn't figure out, these were like some of the smartest brains in this country, couldn't figure out how they could untangle the mess. And they they're going to still look at it for their individual companies, but they were going to try and do it together. And they threw their hands up. This was in today's news.
The only way to do it is to nationalize all these private health insurance companies, and that's not going to happen.
No, but what they were trying to do is work it between Verizon, Berkshire Hathaway, and the third company amongst themselves. Mm-hmm. But they still have to work within the existing web of the American healthcare system.
And they found
that they couldn't do it. That is the problem.
Right. That's the problem. And everything that you said, Thad, about trying to figure out what disease you're going to have, and also the whole idea, like looking at the union health plan. Thank God I'm a teacher, and I do actually have a health plan that takes care of me. But everything that you have to figure out when you throw a pandemic in there, forget it. You've lost your jobs. You've lost your income. It is devastating. And then they throw, $600 at these people? Say, here, pay for your rent, your health plan, all that stuff. Take care of yourself. $600, and then you're going to argue that $2,000 is too much money. Are you kidding me? It's just really unfortunate. And a major change has to happen, but I don't know when it's going to happen.
And in the theater, if we really want to have diversity, then we need people that are not just coming from a certain segment of society that are privileged enough to be able to support themselves, hobbling on with, staggering student debt, healthcare costs, also while they're trying to, start out a life as a starving artist.
I want to make a point you made, a point that you made, that about the healthcare being linked to employment. If people weren't, that's sort of a trap too. Let's say you want to leave your job because you've been in it a long time, or whatever the reasons are. Let's say of volition, and you want to start your own business or whatever. You want to go be a freelance potter, like I'd like to do, right? Well, you can't, because you got how do you stay insured? So the mobility and giving the people the opportunity to be entrepreneurial is squashed by that same system as well.
It totally stunts any sort of sense of enterprise. And it makes you beholden to perhaps less than favorable conditions under the employer that you're working for.
That's exactly right.
So what's the solution?
Do we have
somebody come up with an idea?
I think the notion of a national, how do you like you like the UK system, Thad? Yeah.
Yes.
When I was visiting, it's like, oh, you're covered. You're in the country. You're covered. And I was like, whoa, that's great.
One thing that's interesting, when push comes to shove in America, the Americans really do like socialism. They like a socialist police. They like a socialist police force. They like a socialist fire department. They like socialized elementary school and high schools, and they like socialized vaccine rolls out. They like socialized ventilators. There's a lot of things that when really push comes to shove, and the profit gets taken out, and the real goals seem to come into sharper focus. And I think that's a lesson that can be learned.
They like socialized financing too, because when you sell a stock at a loss, it gets socialized across the whole country. You deduct it. And when you sell a stock at a gain, it's all yours to keep. So we socialize losses and capitalize gains.
Getting back to healthcare, with the pandemic happening in Europe, are they using the military to do vaccines? Because the one thing that I'm always wondering about here is, we're having an issue because our great leadership did not figure how to put the vaccines in the arms. They could produce vaccines and they could ship them from the manufacturer to the States, but then it's up to the States apparently. And I was just wondering why they're not calling out the National Guard and having the Army set up hospitals and parking lots and just do mass vaccinations. Are they doing that anywhere? Do you know, Thad?
So far in the UK, they're just using the already rather robust network for healthcare delivery that is already existing, and they're able to sort of focus the resources on the vaccine delivery at this point.
Right. Well,
There's a national system.
It's a national system, which we don't have. Yeah, that's unfortunate. So anyway, Thad, thanks so much for being here with us at Light Talk. It's been great to get your perspective on all this. For any of you who haven't seen Thad's work, I highly recommend seeing. There's some videos out. It's just amazing, amazing work that he does. And it's great to have you as a colleague, Thad. I want to thank you right now for that.
Well, thank you. I hope I can bring you my questions next time, because I love the listener questions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Just
send us
any
questions.
question. We will go ahead and answer it on the show. Well, the rocking sounds of the Luminoids tells us that once again you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. You can hear our show on Spotify, iTunes, Google, YouTube, at livedesignonline.com, and just about every podcast site out there. Check out our website on lighttalk.org for future guests, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to the podcast. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk Insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast. However,
If you decide to litigate us, the law firm Reflect, Flocked, Flare, and Glare and their paralegal Snoot will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, and the Lone Star State.
And be sure to join us next week when we talk about more happenings in our crazy industry.
All that and a new sponsor.
Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk. Thanks, Thad.
Toodles.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thad. Really great conversation.